I'll open up the meeting for opening meeting of the Newbury Selectboard October 18th at 7 until 4 p.m. I guess the starters, this is Tim Desson. He's sort of our primary counsel with KP Law, and we have I'll open up the meeting for opening meeting of the Newbury Selectboard October 18th at 7 until 4 p.m. I guess the starters, this is Tim Desson. He's sort of our primary counsel with KP Law, and we have town moderator Casey Swallow and FinCom member Jim Sparlakis and FinCom member Joe Hayner. Sorry, brain crash. And I'm guessing that we'll probably have a couple of other FinCom members join us on Zoom call.
Yeah, I expect both Gary and Nathan.
Great. Okay. Good.
Yeah. So I don't know.
There's another gentleman there I haven't had a pleasure of meeting.
New town
right.
clerk.
Sorry, Jim. Yeah.
Okay.
Jim Blatcher.
Oh, okay. Nice to meet you, Jim.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure. Yeah.
And again, Casey and Joe.
We have met.
Great.
So I do have Rick, not just for this set, but for the whole, I have the packet loaded. So if at any point you want to do a share screen, if we do get Zoom participants, we can share anything.
Okay, good. Yeah, it looks like there's nobody else on
Has
the call.
anybody else noticed on Article 12, and I don't know this is for that, I'll just my statements, that the last one is repeated.
Let me just do the announcements first, Casey, just
Oh.
sort of, this is on cable, I think, so I should go through the announcement. Even though there's nobody else present. Okay, so the meeting is being broadcast on local cable TV and recorded for rebroadcast on the local cable channels and on the internet. The Zoom credentials are dialed by phone. You would dial 646-558-8656. And whether you're calling in by phone or meeting it's 844-6036-1204 with a passcode of 561232. Other announcements. So there's a fall trail hike noted here, but that was yesterday. So I don't. It was a very nice hike.
It's more just for all those people who read the agenda ahead of time. We sometimes include those things.
Those who read the agenda, this one is fast. There's a flu shot clinic scheduled for Tuesday, October 19th, which is tomorrow, from 10 a.m. to noon at the town office annex. It's sponsored by the Council on Aging and Conway's Pharmacy. You need to bring your insurance card. There's a high dose available. I'm not sure. Not familiar with high dose.
Those over 65.
Okay. Okay. As opposed to a third dose, a high dose. I didn't realize that we over 65 got a higher dose.
It's a stronger.
Okay. Which makes us feel worse. Maybe. You can call 978-363-1104 to register for that flu shot clinic. Can people walk in, or do you have to pre-register?
They ask for pre-registration,
Yeah.
but if someone, and if someone's listening now, there's both the online link on the website as well as they could leave a phone message with the Council on Aging.
Okay.
But I think if someone didn't have the opportunity and they show up, maybe they could be accommodated, no
Yeah,
guarantee.
Okay. So just in case anybody wants to try calling again, the number is 978-363-1104. Okay. This coming Saturday at 2:00 p.m. Special town meeting. We know that's an unusual time, and because of COVID, an unusual place. But please attend. We need a quorum. We need a quorum of 90 people. We always need a quorum, but in this case, we need a quorum of 90 people because there are 2 articles that exceed $20,000 in value. So it's really important that people attend if you're able. It is only 14 articles long, and in my mind, none of them are controversial, which means it should be pretty quick, as town meetings go.
Sorry, I said that, Casey.
There's the potential for it to be a quick meeting. I have my fingers crossed, Casey. So again, this Saturday, 2:00 p.m., be there at B Square. There is also a public meeting regarding the soldiers and sailors meeting, talking about options, scheduled for Monday, October 25th, which is next Monday, at 7 p.m. Trick or treating. The police departments in West Newbury, Merrimack, Groveland, Amesbury, and Newburyport all have put out a common press release that is scheduled for October 31st from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. You can go to the town website, wnewbury.org, and on the announcements on the front page, I think you actually have to scroll down, so you have to choose see all. But there is some information there giving safe, safe trick or treating given today's world. So you might want to take a look at that if you have kids who are going to be going out. Speaking of Halloween, so the Pentucket's Art Foundation has a Halloween-inspired terror trail. It's going to be taking place at Maple Crest Farm, which is over on Bolton Street. Most people probably know where that is, right by the intersection, across from the intersection with Brickett on Maple Street. And
Bolton Street.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Bolton Street. Sorry, on Bolton Street. Thanks. As this coming Saturday, October 23rd, from 6 to 9 p.m., you can go to the Pentucket Arts website, which is pentucketarts.org. And I think there's a $10 fee to attend. Apparently they're pretty high interest. And I understand it's going to be terrifying. So very Halloween themed based on what I've heard so far. So there's something to do with your Saturday night. As always, there's a need for volunteers on a number of different committees, not least of which would be the FinCom, which is sitting with us tonight. Also the Conservation Commission and the Climate Change Resiliency Committee, all are indeed members, of additional members. I think there's one vacancy on the FinCom and one on the CONCOM as well. And the Climate Change Resiliency Committee could easily use a couple of more people with relevant information and knowledge and a little bit of energy. Finally, you can subscribe for email town news or announcements whenever information is released from the town website. It's www.wnewbury.org/subscribe. Okay, so now we're going to have a joint meeting with the town moderator and the finance committee. And this is to review the fall special town meeting warrant. And I guess talk about any other strategy that we
I think, generally the draft motions are what guide this meeting, but I think, like you said, Rick, if there's other things, for example, on the FinCom booklet that just went out today, the initial draft had rain date. We took that out to genericize it. That's something I think we should talk about tonight, if whether due to weather or due to lack of quorum, what would be the plan? For instance, if there's a quorum of 40, I believe we could address all but 3 of the, is it 40? 45? All but 3 of the articles. It's only those that are above 20,000 that require the 90 quorum. So would we, let's say there's 50 people, do we go ahead with those and then adjourn? Those are the kinds of things hopefully we can get worked out tonight.
Yeah.
So, but did those say there's 7 that would be okay? Are those 7 legitimate if they've been voted, and the other ones are not? Yeah, it would.
Yep. So I think it's 11 of them don't, that includes the opening article of town reports.
But it's a good question, because then it raises the question of, are you just going to want to adjourn the meeting permanently without them taking up those 3 articles with the anticipation that they appear on a later warrant or something? Or are you gonna want to adjourn to a time certain and try to pick another date where we might get a quorum? And then we have to go through the whole rigmarole about where is it and when is it and all that kind of stuff again. So it might be easier to just adjourn it to a time certain if it looks like we're not gonna get quorum, and just try again.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, because trying to get people to come to, granted, they're the 3 most interesting articles on the warrant because they involve sums of money, but, it's not the most exciting warrant.
Yeah. So one reason why people might want to come in particular is there is, an article to, move $200,000 from free cash to use it to reduce the tax rate, which will, for the average taxpayer, result in a 0% interest or 0% increase from the previous year. So, there's a little self-interest there for all of us in making it to this meeting to vote on that particular article.
Well, and just to add to that, the combined net effect of the proposed budget amendments is a reduction of about 114,000 from the operating budget. So that's also, factored into that estimated tax rate.
Yeah.
So if those budget amendments didn't pass, that would increase the tax rate.
Right, okay. So there actually is
So 314,000
Right.
savings.
I'm gonna put that on I'm gonna put the signs on it.
Yeah.
Put that.
So that's roughly, call for round numbers, about 2% of the annual budget. And if the average tax bill is, what is the average tax bill? Maybe 9,000 now?
Almost.
Yeah, so that means that to the average person, that corresponds to about $180 reduction in your annual taxes. So that's worth a couple hours of time. Actually, it's gonna be less. Right, Casey, sorry.
No, we haven't been having quorum problems.
Yeah, no, we
After
haven't.
COVID, we've
haven't.
been very
Yeah.
successful in
Yeah.
getting people there on time. And we've been getting through the meetings fast too, so.
Right.
I think, I'm optimistic, and the long-term focus looks good.
Yeah. So I was just looking at this actually to see what it's, last I
Oh,
saw.
is 30% rain on Saturday?
Oh, really?
30%, well,
Wow,
30% is nothing.
That means 70%.
Nothing.
Well, we're looking at different forecasts because the National Weather says partly sunny with a high near 61, north wind 3 to 5. So almost no wind, sun, and low 60s.
Yeah,
It's not such a bad
that's
fall
what
day to be
I like
outside.
mine better than yours.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you want to just say that is a game day decision of whether to go forward with 11 articles and continue for the 3, or whether to just adjourn the entire thing? And one other thing, which sounds like a lot of headache, but may not be necessarily, is let's say you had the 45 you needed. Let's say you could do the 11 articles that are below that threshold, and you could do a separate town meeting, a separate special town meeting warrant, post it, it's 14 days. And that would avoid having to pin down. I mean, if we needed to pin down a date certain by Saturday, we could easily do that.
Yeah.
Justin, Bartholomew has said they're happy for Pentucket to be used if we want to go indoors. So I guess we should probably do that this week. That way we have a fallback option if we need it.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I agree, I think, what if, let's say the weather completely changed and it decided to pour down rain, we need an option
Yep,
for that anyway. So it's always good to have, I think, an idea of what you're gonna do in case something doesn't go right. So are we in agreement that it would be indoors if it's later on? Yes.
I don't see we have an option. I mean, if it, we're pushing the border, the boundary right now with an outdoor meeting. And, if we have a good day, that's great.
Yeah.
But I think it would be foolish, personally, I think it'd be foolish to expect that we'd be able to get a good date.
The towns of the Commonwealth are split on whether they're still trying to meet outside. And not all towns have a fall town meeting, but
Yeah.
of the ones that do have a fall town meeting, they're kind of split on whether it's going to be indoors or outdoors and whatever.
I don't see how we can do, as, further on into November,
I
how
agree.
we could do an outdoor.
Right. Yeah, so I think we have to then, try
So
to.
then so we had this long discussion about the mask mandate and social distancing and all that kind of stuff. I think we're gonna do this one indoors. And so is there anything different about, so Governor Baker lifted the mask mandate. So we can't insist that people wear masks if they're indoors.
Yeah, I suppose we can. We can certainly ask.
Actually, moderators get to make the rules.
Yeah,
So I can say you have to wear a mask. Now, I'll probably get a lot of heat for it.
yeah,
But I intend to wear mine on Saturday. I mean, I'm not gonna tell other people they have to wear a mask and then show up without one. So,
okay,
and it says in Jen's piece of the paper yesterday or the day before, or well, it wasn't Sunday, but maybe it was yesterday. It said that masks will be required
okay.
and that there will be a special area for people who refuse, well, it just doesn't say refuse, who don't wish to wear masks.
Yeah, and I think that would extend also, if we can't accomplish a full meeting and we choose to reschedule it
Mhm.
somewhere inside, I think we would do something similar, which would be to have, a corner where, non-mask wearing people could sit and everybody else would, somewhat apart from.
Okay, so it would be scheduled for indoors, and then, so I guess we go back to a Monday night, is that?
I'll work with, we'll talk tomorrow. And, prior to the last meeting, when the date was firmly set, I just corresponded with Justin, to see, could we have, and he said, yeah, definitely. We just need to figure out the date, make sure it's available. So we didn't go that, we didn't go to that step of figuring out dates and venues. But I think either the Page Gymnasium or preferably the Pentucket Auditorium, I would think would work well, or the Pentucket cafeteria, which has the advantage of having the door directly outdoors. If someone preferred to stand out the door, they could still basically hear and see everything.
Okay. Yeah.
So we just need to, so I'll get with Justin tomorrow and with Casey, and I think we'll probably do a doodle poll or something just to get the board members and the FinCom's availability so that we don't, float a date that doesn't work for you all.
The one problem with the cafeteria is that school's in session and they have the tables all set up in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's not very conducive to social distancing and
Mm-hmm.
having people at a meeting, because they go the long way.
Mm-hmm.
And people are sitting opposite each other. So it's kind of an awkward arrangement for a town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the auditorium has the auditorium seats. So-
One thing to take into consideration is that, all the health related advice at this point has suggested there's some correlation between time of exposure, and I don't really understand why, maybe it's viral loading or something if you're near somebody for a long period of time, but, there's time of exposure. And if there are only 3 articles, and I don't think they're going to be controversial articles, but you never know. The meeting should be very short.
Yeah. Well, let's hope we get a quorum and
Right,
the weather's nice on
Right.
Saturday.
Yeah.
And everything works out for you.
I think it is actually 4. I think it's actually 4 because there's the water 100,000, the water 47, 150 for the backhoe and then the 200 for the free cash.
Oh, right,
So
okay.
I'm sorry, I said 3, it's actually
And
4.
the cumulative first articles.
What do you mean?
On the.
But that's that's a good question to Tim. So the budget amendments would reduce the operating budget. So I wouldn't think that would,
That would trigger the quorum requirement.
I wouldn't think so, because it's, it's well below it's not raising additional money. It's,
So the quorum for action at special town meeting articles with appropriation which do not exceed 20,000 shall be 40. For all articles with appropriations which exceed $20,000, 90 voters shall be. So you're not seeking an appropriation for those.
nope,
So I think it wouldn't be triggered there.
that would be my
No,
thought
I
too.
think
Tim, you just said it was 40 for.
Yeah.
It's,
It's 40.
25 hours.
yeah,
This is the one that.
Yeah, no, it's 40, yeah.
we need 40 for just the meeting.
Yeah.
But if we're gonna have an article over 20. But when we take up the line item budget in the spring town meeting, each one of these lines is considered a separate motion.
okay,
And so that means that just the line number, now, the one that's got the increase of $20,000 for the special counsel, right there,
okay.
is it 20 or 25?
20.
20, so that right there would make that one out. I mean, if we consider them each individual articles, then that one's out, and then the question, and I'm not, defer to Kevin on this, if it's a decrease, does it count?
Yeah.
But the other one's an increase, so clearly it
Yeah,
counts.
if you're gonna treat them like individual motions, then you're gonna have a different answer.
Yeah, well, that's what we've always done. And when it passed in the spring, they were considered individual motions, and we take it up differently because we take it up as a whole, so I just read every line, and if anybody wants to discuss one of the lines, they all hold. And we go back and pick it up. And there are usually some votes where, but then at the end, whatever the finance committee, had proposed, is the motion on the floor when we start. And the ones that didn't have any holes or that didn't get changed, the motion on the floor is to appropriate what the finance committee recommended. And we voted as a whole at the end, but they are considered individual lines because we take them up one by one.
Yeah, and in that case, anything over 20 grand would, I mean, the bottom line is we need 90 people there and sunshine.
Yes.
That's really what we need. Because I think, you could postpone these 5 or 6 articles to a date certain, but then you're gonna have the same issue. You're gonna get 90 people out of bed for a few, even if they're bigger ticket items, people are gonna say, well, I went for the last one, that's good enough, I did my duty.
Yeah, well, if you cancel this one completely, then people have already come to
Yeah.
what they changed and sitting outside, I think they'd be pretty ticked about it also, so.
Yeah.
I think that.
Yeah.
That's a good point too. If you get 50
You need to
people,
direct people.
just save up their afternoon to be there, I think it's pretty bad to just cancel everything.
And then everybody remember bring cell phones and lots of phone numbers of your nearest and dearest.
Free ice cream. Okay, well,
So you all should have the draft motions in front of you. So I put in both in red line and in comments, just any changes from the earlier draft the board had seen. And I think those were pretty much entirely resulting from legal review. I assume the board will do the same as it has in the past with a single board member making all the motions and where you draw straws prior to the meeting. So what time should we post the pre-meeting? And I'll have the same question for FinCom, and I know Nathan will be needing to preside because Gary is not available.
When we post, previously, we posted a half hour or 15 minutes.
Usually a half hour.
Okay.
I think I wouldn't go 15. I would definitely
So
go.
it's post for 1:30.
Is that a joint meeting, Angus? or-
No, it's not. Yours would be separate. And, you know, I'll send something to Nathan and Gary as well, because you guys are gonna, if you choose to, take a recommendation on the free cash, because that's the one that you didn't have the information to vote.
Okay.
So you might want to allow a little more time for that.
Yeah, I read these all over and they sounded.
Casey, what was the line that you said was repeated? I
Sorry,
didn't see it.
Article 12, the last line.
It's not in the motion itself.
Oh,
In the
On the
article.
article.
I didn't see that either.
It says, yeah,
It's a
or
different-
take any other action. No, take any
Oh.
other action.
Oh.
You really wanted to emphasize that.
Probably my fault.
No, it's my fault because I didn't like that, so I brought it up. I wanted to really make sure that I got.
So we were just, it was sort of, we were just doing that on purpose, Casey, just to get it.
Yeah, I know. When I noticed that it was double, I said, oh, you know, after you look at the warrant so many times, you go, oh yeah, that article, that article, you just don't really.
Well, the FinCom booklet, I mean, how many sets of eyes had it had on it? And then after it's printed and he's like, it's right. Oh, I mean, and how many people reviewed it? Yeah. Since we're here, Tim, I know in your office's comments on the housing trust, you wanted to point out and make sure we were aware that we're not proposing a bylaw or anything. Do you want to just spell out briefly, like, once assuming town meeting votes to authorize establishment of the trust, the board then has the authority to appoint a trust, but can you just speak to what would then be? Because I know a lot of towns have a bylaw that kind of more spells out its powers and duties and things.
Right, so, there's two options. One is, assuming the town meeting approves this, there's a statute that outlines what the trust, how the trust is selected and what their authority would be. And that, it's actually a pretty comprehensive statute. It goes through a lot of different responsibilities and authorizations they would have. Some towns do choose to go into more detail and outline in more specificity what those responsibilities would be, and if there's any deviations from the statute, they're allowed to make those. And that would be, I believe, by a select board vote after the town meeting authorizes the trust. And then either way, once after the town meeting vote and the trust is established, we would have to draw some trust documentation, the declaration of trust, and that document would have to be accepted by the select board as well. And then they would be responsible for appointing members of the board. But that's, and so the meeting, I don't know if anybody wants to explain this at town meeting on Saturday, but really what we're doing now is the first step. It's really laying the foundation so that the trust can do its work, but it doesn't really appropriate any funds. It doesn't vote on who will be on the board. It's just, now we have the skeleton, and then we need to fill in the meeting after that.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And we've had similar situations lots of times where we have some sort of enabling legislation that we have to accept before we can take action on it, and sometimes we do it at the same meeting. And sometimes just do the enabling legislation at one meeting and then nothing happens for a while.
Yeah, but this case is probably some sense, I think, Angus, you had an interesting example in another community with Marshall or something where there had been an effort to set up a trust and the funding mechanism at the same time, and county didn't like that. So in this case, is that correct?
Well, actually, what we did, it was the very first year the trust legislation was approved in 2005, and the town had made a lot of efforts toward affordable housing and bylaws and housing partnership committees and done a lot of real work. And this new legislation came and we said, this is perfect for what we're trying to do. It became very, politically sensitive because we had 440Bs around town going on, and it was very political. And so some number of people organized against it because they felt like the town was becoming the bad guy. It was awful. But so what we tried to do is bring forward a trust that had a significantly scaled back authority that only would have allowed it to do either, placing deed restrictions on existing units. I forget all of the things, but it basically would not have allowed the subsidy of new construction because we felt that would help, calm the waters, and people would say, okay, this is going to help do what we say we want, which is put deed restrictions on existing housing. And even then it wasn't rational. People opposed it, even though it was doing exactly what they said they wanted done, but it had just become too political at that point. So, but with regard to funding, back over the summer, a couple of months ago, there was thought that there might be a separate article on this warrant to also transfer into a trust some funds we currently have in an inclusionary housing contribution account, which totals about 160,000, maybe a little more. And I think it was the right decision this board made to say, let's just do this first, and then in the spring, or, presumably in the spring, but to then put some funding into it once a trust board is established and there's actually a there.
Okay.
Isn't there some language in the income booklet about that? I mean, that you mentioned, because I had a question on that.
Well, so there's something in the newspaper article that was actually,
Okay, I knew I read something about it.
yeah.
Which I thought, well, gee, this is kind of too bad, because I didn't understand it.
Well, yeah, I think, we'll work on, I think there's a good opportunity to help, clarify that. Been in correspondence with the
I
reporter.
remember the conversation with them, for some reason that money's hard to access or something.
Well, it was, when they first set up the fund, it was set up to go, that it couldn't be expended except pursuant to regulations that were promulgated by the planning board, but approved by the select board. So it had kind of like created this situation where they both had to agree. And we did get that done, but it took 2 years. And so those regulations were approved last spring. And so those funds can now be expended. But for actually several years, they had been sitting there kind of locked up in this account because the regulations had never been adopted to authorize what they could be used for. So that has since happened, but that was always viewed as an interim step prior to setting up a trust, which is a much better vehicle for using those kinds of funds.
Great. Are there any questions or any other comments on the articles?
I mean, every year we talk about free cash, and I know on this board, there was, some difference of, the majority positions, the 200,000, but I know not everyone agrees and I know FinCom always gets into that discussion, and you guys haven't even formally discussed the proposal. So do you want to spend any time about the rationale of the 200,000?
Sure, so, I don't recall what the balances are, just for the balance.
It's in the back of the booklet. So the certified free cash was, I think it was 1.75.
Okay, so, we chose 200,000 because, it just so happens that results in a net zero increase, approximately net zero increase for the, I recall that the average of the median, from the median household. So most people will see little or any tax increase, for the fiscal year, compared to the previous year, based on that $20,000 transfer. We could have done more, we could have done less, but that seemed like a good, a good point of reference.
It's also twice the amount that the DOR recommends. The present amount in the certified free cash is more than double the Department of Revenue's recommendation for a town. So it's like 11-12% of our operating budget rather than 5%, which is what the DOR thinks is a good number. So we're not being, we're still being ultra conservative with what is essentially the taxpayers' money that has not been voted in a meeting for any specific purpose. And personally, I feel that the voters have the right to determine what happens with their money. I'd like to have it even be larger, but I can live with 200,000. It is their money that was taxed from them, but in anticipation, say, of funding the police department or salting the roads or whatever. But we didn't need to salt the road, so we're giving them money back. That's what it is.
Yeah, well, kind of to Dave's point, I guess I kind of understand the rationale. The question I would have is that with anticipation of what the articles are going to likely be for fiscal year 2023, will that be maybe a huge uptick that'll affect the free cash and accounts that's going to result in a more significant tax increase for next fiscal year that we can kind of foresee happening, major expenditures, for example, and by having a zero tax increase now, set a precedent that's going to come back and maybe bite us next fiscal year.
Catch up.
Yeah.
That's my concern.
Yeah, that's the only, and I don't know what that is, by the way. I'm speaking a little bit theoretically, but that would be, I guess my only counterpoint to that.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a different situation that people think about it as their own personal money that okay, I'm gonna save because I don't know, maybe I'm gonna need to buy have the roof repaired next year. But it's a little bit different when we have but that's voluntary. We have the town has the ability to make people pay their real estate taxes, whether they like it or not. And if they didn't need it, it seems unfair that we haven't actually voted on it, because we do vote on things that we're saving. We vote to put money in the stabilization account. We vote to put money in the school stabilization account. But the people actually had an opportunity to vote on that, and they can decide, I don't want to save that. But in this case, they sort of saved this without the voters being able to vote on it. To me, it's slightly different to me, because we are conservative and we do put money ahead for bigger expenses. But I think that in that case, I would say that there should be an article if someone wants to save money to put the money in the vote to put it in the stabilization account or something, rather than just leaving it out there as a free cash target. I think there's a slight difference there.
Yeah, and sort of further to the stabilization account, we do need to start. There's significant capital expenditure or capital needs lined up, and so we need to be fairly proactive about moving money over to capital stabilization.
Yeah, if I can just elaborate on two things in response to Jim's question. So the capital program has gotten a huge amount of work and gotten a lot better on the expense side and on identifying the projects. And, Wayne's done a lot of great work, as have other department heads, Chief Dwyer, Mike Couttet, on better costing out what those future expenses, what we think they will be. But we have not, and there's a capital committee meeting this Wednesday, that's meeting pretty much every month. We do need to build out the revenue side of that to see if, based on the projected expenses, whether the 500,000 a year that we've been putting in is going to be sufficient over the course of the 10 years. It's a lot better than it was a couple of years ago, which in FY18, I think it was 300,000, and in 19, 20, and 21, and now 22, it's been 500,000. Actually, I think in 19 it was 300. So the base level of budgeting into stabilization went up by 200,000, and that's been the level for the last 3 years. Then last year we also did the additional appropriation of 700,000 in for the bridge. So we've put in a good amount into capital stabilization in the last 3 years, but we haven't yet had you kind of like put it all together with all the expenses and all the revenues and the modeling it out over 10 years. We could probably, if I had 8 hours and nothing else to do, it wouldn't take longer than that. It's just every day, how it goes. So,
And you can't wait to put the lost.
oh, I love it. I know I love doing those Excel models. So, but I think we are closing in, and I think certainly by winter, kind of early in the new calendar year, over the next 3 months or so, I think we'll be there, and we'll be able to say with a lot more confidence that the 500,000 is the right amount. That if we put that in or that it's a different amount, it's 600 or 650, but there's some number where if we put it in every single year, we're going to have a fully funded capital program. I don't know if it's 500. I think it's probably a little more, but I also think with the 700 we put in for the bridge, that was a nice little shot in the arm for capital. But that's, I don't think we're not going to fall off a precipice. But it's, what we've seen with a lot of the projects that have been bid out in the last few years is the costs are coming in a lot higher.
Yeah, right.
And so, you look at the capital program and how many, that's maybe, 200 projects or something. So, to update each one of those it's a big job. The second thing I would say in terms of are we setting ourselves up for a future tax increase? Not next year, in my opinion. Or in the next 3 years. But if you look at in your booklet on the school stabilization, that's the one that in the finance department we're most concerned about, because our balance is about 1.25. In the current year, we put in just short of 400,000. So at that rate, we could continue to offset the impact of the new middle high school for about another 3 fiscal years past the current one. So 23, 24, 25. But at that point, that's going to come right back onto the tax and onto the tax base, and people are going to feel that.
Yeah.
So that's something that we do need to continue to look at of what,
I guess we need to think, do we want to create a smooth landing, spread it out more?
Right.
And have just instead of a big shot one year.
Right. Or are there other areas of the organization that over that period of time, such as through regionalization, could help to offset that additional cost?
Joe?
So I have 2 questions. One is, since it's already printed, you created an expectation. I assume that people are going to vote, that they're going to have an opportunity to vote. And the second question, which is, even though they didn't vote to have us take their money, they must have voted for this money to be used for something.
They did.
Right. So it isn't as if they didn't vote at all. So I just, I just think we need to take that into consideration. If there is going to be an increase next year, it's going to be significantly more because you did this to
But my feeling is that people the budget will be new. First of all, every year, I've been doing this for a long time. I was on the FinCom for 10 years before I was doing this crazy job. Every year I've heard that there won't be any free cash left next year. I've heard this for 20 years and it never happens. We always end up with 1.5 to 2 million. Every year it happens, and I've heard it, everyone's like, oh, it's gonna be awful next year, and it never is. It just never is. You can look at the numbers. The average, I went back 5 or 6 years, the average free cash, certified free cash every year has been 1.7, which is exactly what it is this year. And so 200,000 out of that, we're still gonna have 1.55 in free cash, which is a huge amount for a town of our size. So we can afford to, we'll be able to put more things, we'll be able to fund our stabilization fund, which we're supposed to do by doing it through the appropriation process anyway, but have it in the regular budget rather than seeing what's left in free cash and then putting it in stabilization. And we've been doing that lately too. So I don't think there is a financial problem. We're being very cautious in our savings, and I don't think it's a problem.
A big factor on why the free cash balance always seems to bounce back is the turnbacks, the budgeted expense lines that are not fully expended. And there's a few of those that really illustrate the point. One of them is fire, where, I think we budget very conservatively. We have a call fire, department, so we only pay, other than the administration, which is fairly modest overhead. We only pay based on the number of responses, number of fires. You go into the year, you have no way of knowing. I think the chief and the board of fire engineers have proposed what year after year proves to be a pretty conservative budget, meaning they typically underspend. But no one's going to ever say don't budget conservatively on fire. So that's one. Solid waste, I think in FY21 in particular, was budgeted very conservatively. At that time, as you probably remember, there was the whole recycling, the per ton costs were fluctuating. They were going from $16 a ton to $93 a ton. I mean, it was all over the map. So the Board of Health, when they proposed their FY21 budget, took the high number and annualized it, and that was the basis of the solid waste. And if you look back to the FY21 budget, it spiked in the solid waste, and that's why. That proved to be conservative, but they just wanted to cover the contingency. The third one, that's a very clear example, is the FinCom reserve account. You carry that just in case, but in a typical year, you don't spend anything from it. So you raise 60,000. In the current year, I think it's like 98. If you don't approve a single FinCom transfer, that's all money we've taken out of the pocket of the taxpayer because we thought we might need it, that we didn't need. So just those 3 line items out of the 200 line items in the budget account for, I don't know, Stephanie's probably got the numbers, but account for well over 100,000 that's going to just go back to free cash. So no one's doing anything wrong. It's just the natural budgeting process with some of these lines. So many other lines in the budget are budgeted almost down to the dollar. And we know going in, it's going to be pretty much exactly that. But there are some that you don't.
Those 3 you just outlined are kind of cyclical.
Yes.
I mean, they happen every single year. So sure, people are paying tax, but it's coming back each year too. And we have been applying it consistently to try to offset.
And
in Maine, we had something called reserve funds where we would put money into a one-time account that would stay there year after year. It didn't lapse at the end of the fiscal year, and it would be there for contingencies like that. But it could be activated with a vote of the council that meets every 2 weeks instead of town meeting, which meets twice a year. So that's the problem, is because I've asked Stephanie, I asked Lori before her, like, can't we, on fire budgeting, couldn't we just put $100,000 into, or whatever the number is, into some account outside the operating budget and then draw from that account if we need it? That way we don't have to put it into the budget every year, and we just replenish it every year. We put some more money into it, but that way we're not raising this big amount in the operating budget every year. And, I'm told we can't really do that. I don't know, maybe we could, maybe we put it into some fire staffing stabilization account, get an authorization every year to spend up to the full balance, and that's there if you need it. If you don't need it, it just carries forward, and maybe you only put $20,000 in year 2 instead of 160 or whatever.
Yeah, and Ipswich, we had a management transfer account, and it was really effective. So that way there, like Angus said, when situations arise, we could have a vote from the select board. It was really helpful instead of going back to town meeting.
And was that applicable to anything, or what was it after?
So it was for contract negotiations, any unforeseen expenditure that arose that was outside of the regular budget process. Something were to happen, it was, again, the manager could.
But it was still in the operating budget though, right?
It was.
Yeah, I'm thinking of something like
But
more
that's
of a
just
reserve.
another variation.
Right.
It's just a variation.
Yeah.
That legally what we could do.
Yeah.
Without a.
Well, actually, I think it sounds like the way you were describing it, Angus, it sounds like what we almost do is take a piece of the reserve fund and set up sort of a static account that gets replenished each year based on how much you spend out of it.
That's the concept. I don't know if it works here. In Maine, you could definitely do it. Here, no one's told me you can do it,
So
so.
if it needs to be $100,000 or $200,000, it's sitting there and is available for whatever purpose might come up. And then whatever is spent would then be replenished.
Well, yeah, I mean, up there, we had like 30 or 25 or 30 reserve funds.
Yeah.
And they were for specific purposes. So there was a personnel reserve. So if someone retires who has 20 years of accrued vacation and you got to pay them $17,000, it wasn't in the operating budget, I go to the council, get a vote, and we pay them out of the reserve fund. And then at the end of in the budget process, we would replenish that. So I don't know, does this resonate with you, Tim? Is there a vehicle to do this rather than just raising it, giving it back, raising it, giving it back?
The reserve funds are a somewhat common feature amongst towns, but they vary. It's not as automatic as I think what you're looking for.
And that's still in the operating budget. So you're
Yeah.
still raising it every year.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really
Yeah.
address what I'm suggesting.
Yeah. I mean, we can put our heads together and see if there's a better way to do that.
Because there's certain, and Stephanie can run a report, although it's tough going back more than 2 years because we're in the software and we have different software. But we could run a report on like the typical turnbacks per department, per category. And what you'll see is there's a few sections of the budget where consistently year after year, there's significant turnbacks. And that's the phenomenon. If there's a better way to do it, our ears are open.
Except when there isn't.
That's right. That's right.
I've been here when we
Yeah.
have used the entire
We want
reserve
some
fund.
time backs in the financial.
So it happens.
The entire account.
Yes.
I mean, one of the major expenses that, I don't know if it would actually fall into the normal budgetary process, but everything I hear about the water department, and the future needs, whether it's, new wells or, line, kind of line repairs or line replacements. I mean, those numbers to me seem staggering. And I guess Angus and team and Wendy, I know you were a board of water commission recently. I mean, is that something that would be part of the kind of normal budgeting cycle, capital stabilization that our chief was just talking about? Or is that something that would be almost like a separate issue that would be dealt with separately because it's water? How would, because that would be one I would foresee that's going to be a pretty big hit for us.
I think water, in my view, is one of the top three challenges we have as a town, because the by law, an enterprise fund is financially independent. And so it's supported by rates, the water ratepayers, which is a subset of the town. That doesn't mean the general fund can't voluntarily contribute to it, but you need the town meeting appropriation to do that. So the town meeting could choose to expend some of the operating budget toward water capital needs or water staffing or whatever it chose to. What you can't do is just, hey, we ran out of money in water, so we're just going to move money. We can't, in the finance office, just move the money. But if town meeting chooses to do that, the general fund certainly can subsidize the water capital or operating needs. The water capital needs far outstrip, what the rates are going to support. And that's so coming up with what's a long-term sustainable financial plan for the water specifically. I know the Water Commission has been saying more and more in the last couple of years that they feel a general fund contribution is going to be needed in their view in order to make the numbers work. Part of what we lack is there's not like a water business manager. So there's not like a very clear business case of that. I think they may be right, but to arrive at that, like for our office to do that, which there's a ton of hours that we don't have that, like the water department, the last time I worked, they had a full-time business manager. And it wasn't that much bigger a town than we have, with 7,500 people instead of 4,500. So, and they helped with rate setting and they did all of those things. We don't have anyone on staff with that responsibility. So it's more like a gut it's not just that, but I look at the water needs and say, could you do a bond issue and get a couple of $1 million to do these main repairs? And yes, it's going to add $100,000 a year to your operating budget over 20 years, but you can get the money. But, that's they don't have it in the bank today to do those repairs. And we've also had some discussions about, is there an opportunity through regional collaboration with Newburyport that could help to offset some of the operating costs for the water department? But I don't think it hasn't gotten. That's an idea.
Eminent domain.
That's an idea.
I like that. We should just go put a fence up.
We need Albert Elmo.
So there's a few different ways to get there, and it's I think they've all been on the table, but it never gets enough time to get to an answer. And there are different ways to get there, and different groups have different ideas of what the right way is. And so it's and we don't have the bandwidth to like fully flesh out each of the regionalization versus town contribution versus we can't go much further with water rates. We already have some of the highest water rates in the whole state. So we certainly understand the ratepayers have gotten squeezed. But a lot of people think the rate tier should be a lot lower for the high volume users than it is. It's 35,000 gallons right now. Like out of all the water users, how many hit that threshold?
Yeah.
I could count on two hands. It's, so there's the rate structure could be redone.
Could be modified, right? Yeah. Which would, have a, double effect. Besides raising more revenue, it might also cause some people to reduce their water usage,
Which is good, but the water department complains when it's
not selling enough water.
they're not selling enough water.
Does anybody have FinCom have any more questions regarding cases?
The only question I have is the usual one, which is, are you aware of any reports that anyone wants to make at the meeting under Article 1? I haven't heard
I know
anything
of
from
none.
anybody.
I think the practice has been to not, to
Any more
discourage
reports?
them, right? So I think people are out of the habit.
We actually said there wouldn't be any, at the first outdoor town meeting, we
Right.
said no report. reports.
Right.
And then after that, we just sort of didn't say anything about it.
Yeah.
And when I asked if there were any reports, there weren't, but then there was the
Rob Chang?
citizen.
Oh, yes, it's gonna be.
Yeah, so that's a report. But you know, normally, I ask people to let me know so that I'm not just standing there being blindsided by the fact that I didn't call on you for your report, but I didn't know you wanted to make a report. But I haven't heard anything from anybody wanting to make a report. So if you hear of anybody wanting to make a report.
We'll put out
Rob James gave one for the.
Right.
The COVID, and what was going on,
Yes.
and, you know, the percentage vaccinated in West Newbury.
Yeah.
So I guess we anticipate that when we finally get back to something that closely resembles whatever normal was before, that there are gonna be, you know, multiple half hours.
That'll be a long reading.
Instead of 10 minutes for a report, I'm gonna have to let them have 25 minutes for a report. Well. No, I think everyone's done a very thorough job of going through this and over it and up and down, whatever. Yeah. Now I'll probably go home and wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh no.
Like Rick said, nothing super controversial, nothing.
I do have a few little concerns about things, but because I think that the whole water thing is very complicated. The bylaw change for the
stormwater. Yeah.
stormwater is very complicated, and I couldn't wade through all the verbiage myself. It was just, whoa. When I get insomnia, I know where to go. But it strikes me that it's a response to a responsibility we have. We have to have this. It's not something that somebody in West Newbury decided they wanted to have.
No, it's basically every municipality in the country.
It's what?
Every municipality in the country.
Has to have that.
Yeah, that's kind of the best way I would describe it is, it's in response to our permit issued by the EPA. We're a regulated entity because we have stormwater outfalls that are discharging in the so-called waters of the United States. And so those are we are regulated. And so we have to prove as a condition of the 5-year permit that we received that we're meeting certain things. One of those in year 3 of the permit, which actually ended in June 30th, is to adopt a bylaw that regulates, among other things like erosion and sedimentation and those kinds of things. And the thing that's all kind of the backup to the punchline, which is, I think is very interesting, since it does apply across the country. When the EPA put this out, their target was not heavily regulated Massachusetts, which has had stormwater regulations from the DEP since 1996 and has had local regulation of land use that far longer than that. That's quite a lot of scrutiny. It's for places in the country that have been largely under or unregulated. That's the target. We have to adopt what's largely their template. We have very little to say on some of the definitions and how wordy and legalistic. It's largely boilerplate. And it actually, that's been part of the confusion at the staff level is we already have stormwater standards in our subdivision regs and our zoning. And now we got to layer this on top. And so we're trying to do that in a way that's not going to be as little confusing both to the staff and the board, the planning board that will enforce it, as well as to the developers or the home builders who just need to know, what are the rules? Just tell me the rules and I'll meet them. But they're going to be in different places. It's very messy because it's not like we're starting with no regulation. We have a lot of regulation. So
Who should be our designated answer person for when?
I'm happy to field the stormwater stuff. Yeah. And the meat of the stormwater regulation is the draft regulations. The bylaw you see is fairly brief. The draft regulations were what, 27 or 24 pages? I mean, and that gets into much more of the detail. And that's something that if the bylaw is approved, the planning board as the permit granting authority would then be authorized to approve regulations. But yeah, it gets to be like mind-bendingly complicated. you know, and then you have conservation regulations that apply.
And the other one, I think, I don't know how to feel about this, because I know there's been some stuff going on in town. I personally was not able to watch the presentation, and I keep thinking, I think it's still on the website, isn't it? About the land trust, the affordable housing trust.
Oh, yeah, the planning board meeting.
I keep saying I'm gonna watch that, and I just, for some reason, it's not on my short list. But, I think there's a potential there for people to not understand what sorts of things are you gonna use that money for? You know, it's vague enough, I suppose on purpose, because you don't know, but, you know, well, the money's gonna come probably from this, account, and then be supplemented in subsequent town meetings or whatever, but what exactly are you gonna use this money for? I mean, you can't buy somebody a house with $146,000 or, you know, or build somebody. It just seems like it's a small amount of money to attack a very large problem. And even Steve said to me tonight, well, will this put us in any better shape with respect to our affordable housing situation? I said, I don't think so. I think this is just, it's a good thing to do to help people to be able to
What it does-
work in and stuff like that.
Yeah, part of what it will do, Casey, is once it's funded, which is not what we're, you know, taking out of this meeting, but once it's funded, it will give us flexibility to respond rapidly when some opportunity relative to affordable housing presents itself, or we see one, and, you know, presents itself. Maybe it's a little too passive on our part, but, you know, if there's an affordable housing trust and we understand that there is a need for affordable housing and an opportunity exists, it'll enable us to respond quickly without having to go to town meeting to, you know, to get some basic funds to you know, to secure something.
There's a beauty in that, but there's also a problem with that, because some people will think that we don't want to take this out of the hands of town meeting. You know, we don't want to relinquish our control of
Yes.
what gets done with that money.
Yeah.
I don't know where I
Yeah,
stand on which way it's gonna go.
I hear what you're saying, but those are funds that have already, by dint of being in the particular account that they'll be in,
Mhm.
they're already designated as being there for that purpose. So, you know, it isn't like we would be taking, you know, it isn't like there's a slush fund waiting for somebody to grab from it to use for something.
Until you just said that, I did not know that. I did not know that. With all the discussion there's been about this, I did not know that those funds had been designated for that purpose.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, and there aren't, we're not creating an account for those funds at this point. There are funds that came in through, what's the name of the mecca?
Inclusionary housing.
Yeah. Sort of make up funds for exclude, when you can't produce enough affordable, when you have a fractional unit of affordable housing in, say, the, conservation, the,
Open space residential.
OSPD, open space preservation, development. And if you have a fractional unit, instead of building a fraction of the house, the developer pays a certain amount of funds, and that goes into this account, which is then designated for use for an affordable housing type purpose. We, as of yet, haven't had a use for those funds, but that's where they've come from, and that's specifically what they have to be used for. So.
Well, now that's an important point to make sure people understand if this comes up for discussion, because that was not clear to me. And I couldn't answer a question. My husband asked me a question. I couldn't answer it. I said, I don't know. I don't think this does us any good with respect to the 10% affordable housing.
No, you'll never get near that. That's not really.
It's not the intent.
So this is more of a good thing to do. I'm not disputing that.
It will incrementally improve that, but it's really, we're not going to build ourselves out of the 40B situation. There's no way we're ever get to the 10%, to be honest. But this will this money will be sort of like Rick says, it's more able to respond quickly and maybe something, the town can respond to a grant that would help
Or
with
matching funds or something.
something like that, or the town could contribute to the purchase of a lot that could then be used by a developer to make a 1 or 2 units of affordable housing. This isn't gonna be a big, it's a very small start, but that's, and probably always will be small. We're a small town, and the contributions to that won't, to, make dents in the actual 10%, we'd have to be putting in tens of millions. That's not gonna happen. Yeah.
The Casey's comment too, the other question that could come up by somebody during town meeting relative to affordable housing in this trust is that people could say, well, our CPA has a certain, kind of percentage that's allocated to affordable housing. And how was this different? And, like, in that, somebody needs to be prepared with that.
Yeah, okay, and so quick answer, or at least a portion of the quick answer to that is, we can't be nimble with those funds.
Right.
Those funds need to go through the CPA process, they need to go to town meeting. We can't respond quickly with those funds. So this money that's already designated, pre-designated, to be used, the inclusionary funds, the trust could respond quickly. So, if there is an opportunity to leverage some state money or something, I don't know what scenario might come up, but if there's an opportunity, where we need to respond quickly, that's what it's for.
In some towns, they do vote that portion of their CPA money into their trust. They can do that, but again, remember that would have to be voted on at town meeting anyway. So it wouldn't be happening automatically or anything. The town would have to, the voters would have to put that into the trust. It wouldn't be something that would just be automatic.
Interesting.
Rick, if I could just briefly, one example that I think is very clear of something that could come up. It probably won't in this market, but in other towns I've worked in, this was actually a plausible thing, is you had some number of homes that on price were not necessarily at, but were near the affordable threshold, but they don't count toward the inventory because they don't have the deed restrictions and the affirmative fair marketing requirements and other things you need to get them to count and recognized by the state. So the idea there of a trust is, let's say a house is listed for, and this is going to make people laugh, $200,000. Let's just say that if a trust could buy that house, put the deed restrictions on it, make it subject to these, and flip it. It's going to cost some money in legal and transactional costs, but then flip it as an affordable unit that's going to add to your inventory. We don't have homes coming on the market here that are in that neighborhood, but price-wise. But that is something in other communities that's like a very tangible example that town meeting, if that house comes up for sale and your offer is contingent on a town meeting vote and CPC 6 months or 8 months from now, no seller is going to accept that offer. But if you have a trust and they vote that money, you could move in a matter of weeks to make a bona fide offer for that house. So it may or may not happen here, but let's say there was a two family and you could buy it. And, there's at least hypothetically scenarios like that.
Makes sense.
Any more stoppers?
Wish us all luck.
Yeah.
And then good weather and sunshine, 61 degrees.
61 degrees, sunny, light.
No wind.
And lots of people.
Right.
A lot of people.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, yeah, all the other stuff isn't important, really.
Yeah,
There'll be lots of people.
No
That's right,
Red Sox
yeah.
game.
Yeah, no Red Sox team.
Yeah.
We leave now, we get home from the food.
Thanks, guys.
That's fine.
Score.
No spoilers.
0-0.
0-0, okay, good.
Spoilers. Spoiler alert.
It's not like a couple of grand slams.
First inning.
That's the way it works.
Whatever you
They had a
think,
top
right?
meeting, so they didn't have a chance.
Yeah.
So,
Nice to meet
nice
you.
to meet you too. Pleasure. I'll see you in a couple days.
Item B, I think, it's quite at the point where Angus is ready to talk about it. It's, you've got a lot of groundwork done on it, but
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, and because I really want it, I'm very excited about this and I want to get it right. But I think that if we postpone it, it's going to be better. But just so the board knows kind of where I'm trying to go with this is, I know you've seen in the past kind of lists of projects, and what I'm working toward, and I spent part of the weekend on, but just didn't quite get there, is to try to present in a fairly succinct way kind of the universe of projects and initiatives that are currently active and ongoing, and others that are known about but not yet fully started, but they're kind of like no one's forgotten about them. And so I've put that all together in a list, but I want to do like a presentation that's going to be a lot more like, just not reading a list. But I think that, people hear week after week, oh, we're so busy. And, I actually had someone say to me not long ago, like, it seems like you're keeping things from happening. And it's like, it's my head almost exploded because like, we're working so hard and we're churning out work every single hour of every day. So I think if we can do a better job at presenting, like, this is what's going on collectively, and that is hopefully like a starting point to then with the board looking ahead to FY23 budget and setting the policy directives. So, okay, this is what's on the table, and maybe do a better job at prioritizing, because right now we're doing a little toward a lot just based on the mismatch, because there's only so many hours in the week, hours in the day. So anyhow, I think it's going to be very good. I did make a lot of progress. I shared a draft with Rick, and I'd like to have a little more time and also to work with department heads and make sure that what I present is, is a complete, because there's a lot going on, a lot of which about, some of which you may not, but a lot of which probably the general, resident sitting at home, unless they watch all of these meetings, probably doesn't know is actively going on. So that's the intent, and the intent is to be kind of a jumping off point for the goal setting for the subsequent budget cycle. So we can look at, what are the staffing levels that we have, what can we deliver with that, and are some of those, do we need to change some of that if we're going to continue to do and take on more. We had, just for instance, 35 grants that we managed last fiscal year. That's a pretty big number. And so, when there's reticence to apply for new grants, it's not because we don't want to manage grants. We are managing dozens of grants. It's because there's just only a certain number of staff members with a certain number of hours. And when you see that those people are at the breaking point, like, it's part of my job to calibrate the work to the labor and not just like keep saying yes and yes. And then like we burn people out and everyone leaves, and then where are we?
Right.
So I think it'll be good, but I think a little more time
we're going to target that for a lot more.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Rick.
You can stay or?
Nope.
There you go.
Thanks, Tim.
Yes.
Thanks for the help.
Yeah, of course. And I'll be in touch about the wing glass. Good night.
Good night.
That's it.
Okay, so we've got an update on the community compact grant application, which was awarded.
Awarded. Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
So this would be dovetail in with the priorities that you're working on, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those grants do align very nicely with some of what we're doing. So it all kind of,
So are we still planning on contributing some money from existing funds, or is the scope going to be determined by?
so basically there's two initiatives kind of in parallel, as you know, but it would be very easy to get muddled. And so I'll just summarize it. So the two kind of parallel tracks that we talked about, Thursday night at the meeting is a kind of a comprehensive review of the personnel policy and other related personnel policies, whether that's bylaws or regulations. That's something that we had separately budgeted for. And so, that was in the operating budget in one of the expense lines. These funds will support a comprehensive wage and classification study of, actual pay rate, wage range, grades for different positions, and whether that's appropriate, both looking internally within the organization as well as at comparable communities. But because we do have a fair amount of recent data from other similar studies like the one in Merrimack last spring, we are not looking to arrive at like a boilerplate type study with just a lot of data. That's not going to really advance the ball. What we need and what we've talked about is more of I think it would be partly that, but it would also be a look at different departments' workload versus bandwidth. We have different departments with different levels of staffing in terms of hours per week. And, we have a workload that doesn't necessarily align with that. And so we're going to be looking to write a scope that gets into those more qualitative assessment of capacity versus demand. But that means we got to scope it properly and hire the right vendor to do that. So.
Yeah, so that hopefully will help move the issue of sort of matching up staff with getting us to the right staff level, and closer to the right staff level, with what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, we have a big role in that. So draft policy require advanced town manager.
Just, I guess, just since I felt like the meeting Thursday went well.
Yeah.
Do you guys all agree?
Yeah, I do too. It would be great if we had,
Yeah.
a couple more people there, but,
Yeah.
but no, it went great. It was good content.
Okay, so the next topic is just a carry forward from the last meeting. We didn't have time to get to it. So, I'd worked with Stephanie on this. She'd prepared an initial draft, and I'd spent made some revisions. So what you have is kind of a combination of both of our work. And the intent is really to fill what we see as a gap in the current policy. The select board do have a policy that's been on the books for many years. It was revised in 2018, but it's substantially similar to what it always was, which is just that if overtime is worked, that there be a explanation with the timesheet submitted of why the overtime was worked. So when we get overtime from, DPW or police, that's always there, and that's always been there. But there is nothing on the books in the personnel policy or otherwise that requires any advance approval to work overtime or to work hours above budgeted. And so from time to time, for different reasons, different staff or departments may need to do work above budget. And so there ought to be a procedure for how is that reviewed ahead of time rather than once the timesheet comes through, the work has been done. Under labor law, you have to pay it. So there ought to be, some kind of management oversight of prior to the work being done and the cost being incurred.
I had a couple questions.
Sure, please.
So Angus, on the exempt employees, I know you had said some of your more recent hires that was in the contract, that this idea of content. I mean, so will this only apply to those employees, or will this apply to all of the employees now?
So it would apply to all, but so under the personnel policy, the determination of whether someone's exempt or non-exempt is supposed to be made at the time of hire. So every hire that's been made since I've been here, there's been an offer letter that, among other things, has specified that. Some prior employees have that information in their personnel file, others do not. And I think that, so for anybody that's exempt, this policy would apply, but I think it's, there are still a couple of employees that I think that ought to be clarified one way or the other. And I would like to get, KP to do that as just a third party to do that review.
The other question I had is on the overtime, based on the 40-hour week, how will we handle the whole, whether they're taking the lunch or not? Is that part of the 40 hours? Or, I know that's opening up a lot of time, but I think we need to address it. What's going on. Right?
Yeah.
It says only those hours actually worked will be considered. I know that's with respect to, time off, but.
Yep. Yep. I don't disagree with you.
All right, I was trying to put you.
No, it's just, it's a much more complicated issue than it should be.
So maybe that's dealt with in a separate.
Well, so it's funny you mentioned that because Stephanie had put together a separate policy on that very issue of 40 hours. And I said, it's a lot to, like, I don't want to overload the system. And I also don't want to put something like I kind of vetted this, spent some time with it. I didn't have much time. And it's as you know, the building is not open 40 hours a week. But the policy defines full-time as 40 hours a week. So what we've talked about at a staff level is you could change the definition of full-time to match the actual hours of the building. You could say for everybody who's full-time, you have to work 40 hours a week. And we understand that some hours the building's not open. If you were to reduce the definition of full-time from 40, let's say to 38, do you adjust people's rate of pay to kind of make them whole, or do you not do that? The issue of lunch, for the most part, employees are paid for lunch, but not across the board, including union. So it's very complicated. It's because we have kind of a decentralized management structure, it's made it harder to tackle these issues because it's not like the town manager can just,
So
right.
do you think that will confuse the 40-hour, whether it's overtime or not?
Well, that is by federal law, that it's only overtime above 40.
Right, but I'm saying they're paid for lunch, and is that kind of as part of the 40? And if they're not, then it doesn't.
At the end of the day, that's a policy decision. I know, for instance, in Westford, I worked 40 hours a week, but I was paid for 37 and a half. And that was how I was hired. I didn't ever think about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't even an issue. But here, because it's been handled a certain way over time, I think that if the town took the position that, we're backing out 30 minutes a day for lunch, which we're fully entitled to do under federal labor law, I think a lot of people would be really upset by that. That doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. And if you adjust wages so people are made whole, but at least your system has more integrity in terms of the hours actually matching what they work. I mean, there's a number of ways to get there.
So do you feel like it's an issue with this policy or not? I don't want to make it.
No, I do. I mean, but it's a matter of do we hold off on trying to do something until we make it perfect? I mean, I think I'd rather get something done because then we can focus more attention on the 40-hour issue, which is needed. I mean, that goes back years. There's a lot of discussion that's happened on that, including with the personnel committee that didn't really, go anywhere. But it's been something I've been concerned about since my first month on the job. And, for some employees, I mean, name like those in this room, not just those in this room, but, we're all 40-hour and we're all routinely at evening meetings. So it doesn't really matter. But there are other 40-hour week employees that don't have regular meetings after hours. And
Okay.
so it's,
And then just my final question is on the overtime. So department heads ever approve it, like the DPW, are they union or?
they're union.
Okay. So you
Well,
don't approve their overtime.
The highway is union. Buildings and grounds is non-union. So the way this is written, I would have a role with approving non-union overtime, but I specifically, I just didn't want to create a can of worms with regard to the union contracts. And I don't see that there's a problem to be solved there because the chief and the DPW director, in my observation, and I think the finance department agrees, anytime there's overtime, there's a written explanation of what it is. It's not advance approval by my office, but either the chief or the DPW director, they both run their, respective departments, with a lot of oversight. And, so I don't feel there's any problem with how the union overtime has been handled over the years. And I'm not suggesting there's a problem with the other. It's just a lack of policy and a lack of clarity. And it's a potential exposure in terms of internal controls. That's the bigger concern.
All in all, I think it's a good idea, good move. Yeah.
Did you get any feedback?
No, I did not.
So is this at a point, Angus, now where where it will be posted or?
Well, so I guess that's, so what I said in the memo is I get that everything's unclear, but, I think you could definitely, I feel like, the policy on the books, which references the Town Manager Act, which confers in my office, substantial authority over operations and personnel, I would feel comfortable issuing this as a town manager policy and say I have referred it to the select board for incorporation into the personnel policy. Then you would have a future public hearing and you could get get comment. And if we haven't gotten it quite right, but that way at least it's on the books.
Yeah.
And, I think that would be good. I think it would be better to get it in the personnel policy. So I guess it's, if that would be my thought is I could send it out to all staff and say, this is, my office is issuing this. I've referred it to the board and requested they refer it to hearing, which you could do tonight or at a future meeting. And that way everyone has the opportunity to comment. But in the meantime, I've kind of laid down a marker to say, if you intend to work above your budgeted hours, you need to talk to me first.
I don't see any reason to delay. Does anybody see any reason to not refer this to a public hearing at this point? Okay, so I guess I move that we refer this to a public hearing. So it needs to be posted for 10 days.
Mhm.
Thank you. So, all fair.
I would just know, we'll need to look at like what section to put it into and put it in some numbering, hierarchy that makes at least some sense with regard to personnel policy. And then you know, I think you didn't specify a date, so I think if we can get it posted in the next day or two, we could do it for the 1st. Maybe better to do it for the 15th. That allows more time for comment, because I do think it's gonna, you know, I think people may have comments, and I don't want people to feel like it's getting like pushed through. Yeah, so we'll pencil this in for the 15th and we'll get it posted. I'm sure we can get it posted by the end of the week. I don't know if it'll be in the next day or two, just with the other things ahead of us, but I think that's great. I think this has been a kind of a gap for a while, and I want to thank Stephanie for really proactively kind of helping with she did most of the initial draft. I added some things, but it was a good team effort.
So we have discussion of affordable housing policy strategy. And I think, so the materials that were referred to in the email that came in were materials that actually were for our past meeting. And that was from the affordable housing webinar that Wendy sat in on. I actually also sat in on that. So it was good, yeah. And yeah, there were some basic takeaways or basic slides that I thought were relevant. You know, just what are the basic things you got to get together in order to make this work? But Wendy, did you have anything?
Yeah, I think the thing I found most striking is what qualifies as needing affordable housing. So there's a table in here, and some of the positions in income is, you know, a management analyst or a paralegal, fitness study, a teacher, an accountant. And so these are not, you know, people that you would think of that would fall in that category. And in fact, I was speaking with somebody yesterday who said that when they moved here, they had one parent working and one not, and qualified for affordable housing. You know, so I think it's really important that we pursue this so that people are able to live in this Newbury. So that we can combat the spectrum. Another thing that I thought was very interesting is the idea of a regional affordable housing coordinator. Some of this woman from Metro West CD, that's what they do. They go in and help people do it. And I was chatting with her during the webinar and said, well, is there somebody in our region that has a similar function? And she said, unfortunately not. And she suggested that we consider having some kind of regional arrangement, a staff level person that could be helping the trust manage the projects.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
just interesting.
And I wonder how she is funded by the, you know, I recall it's, you know, in general terms, I recall her and, you know, her contribution, but I don't recall how regionalization was handled. You know, I guess municipalities are contributing to it, but I don't know how. I don't know how they put that together.
Yeah, I think it's part of the package. This was something different. She's just saying, you know, if you need a staff person to help you coordinate the trust and the activities, you know, for a small community, you might be better off having a regional manager. We already started with conservation, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it would be a similar model of an MOU with one community being the host that would handle the administrative and, you know, payment, and then there'd be a financial reimbursement.
Have you come across that kind of arrangement?
Not regional. No, in Marshfield, you know, that the housing workload became unbelievable because we went from doing nothing to doing a huge amount, and these LIP units and the lotteries and the monitoring, and it became a huge thing. So we actually did create a housing coordinator position, and it was funded with the CPA funds, and we ended up staffing it not as a staff person, but as a contractor. And so we did an RFP, and we hired an individual who actually was based on the North Shore, and he would come down a couple of days a week. And they continued to fund that over the years. And that, I know small towns have actually took that model. I presented on it at conferences, and people, you know, because we wrote a really good scope, but it was a contractor, it wasn't a staff person. And that was basically because CPC, there were limitations on the use of those CPC funds for a staff person. But that was in like 2002, 2003. So I think since that time, it seems to me, CPA has become much more flexible with, for instance, we pay the CPC coordinator out of the CPC funds, and that's fine. So you might be able to do it more as staff now than you could back then.
I do think that we're gonna have some administrative support from trusts.
Yeah, I think we are. Yeah.
I think the other takeaway for me was finding private developers that actually want to work with you and create affordable housing, not just like a profit.
Right.
Not like a token.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there are, I've heard of developers who that's their business is
Yeah.
affordable housing. Yeah. But they're generally not driven solely by the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
There. Yeah, in Westford, we had a couple of affordable housing developments that were done by a nonprofit, and they had, they would apply for and receive funds out of the housing trust. There are, I think if let's say you were a private developer, either public, profit or nonprofit, and you wanted to consider either a fully affordable or a mixed income development in West Newbury, right now you would probably call me or call Leah as your first point of contact. I think once a trust is set up, it's going to be a better, it could set up more of a, could be more dedicated to that purpose, but it is going to have to gauge what type of project it might be willing to support in terms of either location or density or mix between, affordable and market rate. So I think, some of the assistance I think a trust is going to benefit from, especially as it, ramps up in the first 6 months or more, is setting criteria of what are the types of projects or initiatives that they would want to fund, and ideally set up a transparent public process by which those are chosen, so it's not perceived as as anything other than appropriate. But sometimes trusts are, I think I've told you before, in Westford, I think that was set up kind of like they had given some awards of money, and then they were getting inundated with requests, and they hadn't really set up the clear infrastructure of, is there an application deadline or is it rolling? What type of financial information are we requiring from the applicant? How are we going to vet that and make sure it's credible? What kind of post-project auditing are we going to do, if any? And these were things that the group on the trust was just kind of trying to do the right thing, trying to help. But then as the public started focusing on the 6 figures of money that were going toward development, sometimes in their neighborhood, they wanted to know, like, what's the public money in this? What did it go toward? How was it spent? Is it a grant up front or is it a reimbursement? There's a lot of questions that are going to come up with this trust that they'll need help to figure out.
I did forward this to the people that have expressed interest in the trust.
Right, good, sounds right. I like your slide on the secret sauce.
Yeah.
We did have, when we put out the work scope last spring, Lee and I had put together the work scope to engage, and we ended up hiring LDS or Lynn Sweet, and she helped us with, and continues to be under contract to make sure that we're in compliance with our monitoring responsibilities for the 13 LIP units we have now. We had a second vendor who applied and was very, very good. We didn't feel quite as suited for what we hired Lynn to do, but Lee and I have talked about it a number of times, and we think this individual or her company may be very good for the type of forward-looking visioning, actually helping to, make projects, help us figure out what types of projects the community may support. Because I think what we want to try to avoid is a situation where a public entity of a trust ends up supporting an initiative that ends up becoming very unpopular, because that can be very counterproductive. So that's why, I've talked to Rick about, there might be kind of some low hanging fruit or things where we could put up a trial balloon on like a specific lot to say, would we want to make that lot available for an affordable home, and kind of float that and see if it flies, see if town meeting supports that. As kind of a test. Another thing a trust could do would be, since we have a 10% inclusionary requirement for most developments anyway, it could offer subsidies to go from 10% to 15%, but it will have to ask those same questions of how is it going to determine that the developer really needs that? Like what level are you going to get into their books to make sure like they actually really need that?
Yeah.
I guess I'm not clear when you say that you would need to get into their books and see if they actually need that.
Yeah.
You mean
The
you
funding.
need funding.
Yeah, to provide that greater level. Like, is it really, is it to provide an additional, let's say, 1 unit? What's the public subsidy that's needed to make that
Work for them.
financially, in their interest? And they can provide you their pro forma, and they can provide that, but you then, might want to hire a third party to review their pro forma.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm, in Westford, things were much bigger scale, but that's how it went. The developer would do a pro forma, you'd hire a third party consultant to review their pro forma. So it's, all of these things are, time and energy. So you can do it, but it's not a simple thing.
Yeah, you need the resources to be able to do it.
And if you don't do it, if you treat it like a simple thing, because everyone's like, yeah, we're just trying to do the right thing. But then the abutter to that development is like, wait a second, what do you mean you didn't get an independent financial review? So it's amazing. I've seen very good people be vilified in towns because they're advocating for housing and be all of a sudden treated like, it's terrible to see. I don't want to see that.
Yeah, you can see that happening too.
So what would be the next step, assuming the article passes? Would be for this board to?
So a lot of towns do adopt a bylaw
Okay.
that sets out in more, kind of like our CPC bylaw, that sets out in more detail the composition, the powers and duties. You don't have to. I think, read the statute because it tells you everything it can do. When sometimes the bylaws that people propose or the towns propose have the effect of limiting what the statute allows. The statute is very broad in terms of the powers it conveys. So I think you would want to make that decision of, do you want to flesh it out further or just appoint on the basis of what the statute says? You can do either. And then I think getting people appointed and having them meet and start to really chew on what is it we want to do here. We do have some funding in that fee and lieu account that we could use to engage some technical assistance to help build up the trust. And that's where, I think Leah and I would love to see that happen. And I think she and I both see ourselves coming to some meetings, but we're hesitant to be the sole support, because we know how much work it's going to be.
Yeah.
Every year, I believe it's like in June, the town, not the town, but the town gets a certain amount of money for affordable housing, and I'm just racking my brain to figure out what, and it's not a huge amount. But we usually don't have a specific use for it, so we voted back.
The home funds?
I don't even know what it's called.
Yeah.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I know exactly what you mean.
It happens annually.
Yep. It's like $6,000 to $7,000,
And we usually, I'll just use it, go back to the Essex County.
That's right.
Part of it, and so we never utilize that, but maybe that's something that we can start utilizing.
Yeah, it's the North Shore Home Consortium.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that happens every year.
And what
It
can those
does.
funds be used for?
Uh,
So I wonder, I mean, if we had a trust, could those be funds that then are
Or even administration of it. I don't know, just something that, when it comes across our radar again, we should think about that.
I think it should be used towards the admin of the
Yeah.
trust.
Yeah, so that would be good, yeah.
The time had to be tracked a certain way, the rest of us paid under two different funding sources.
It's not a huge amount of money, but
You said it was $67,000, not 67,000, but 67,000.
Should be a certain.
that sounds about right. That sounds more even than I thought, but.
yeah, I'm looking at,
Sorry, Stephanie, what did you say?
I think it was around.
Yeah.
yeah, so I have correspondence in spring of 2019 and spring of 2020. I don't recall getting anything this past year, but it's pretty much annual. I want to say it's $6,000 or $7,000. And in the time I've been here, we've always, we haven't had a project. And so it goes back into the regional and it's used somewhere else that does have a need. So once we have a need, it is money that we can get.
Well, and could the need just be initially just the administrative overhead for operating?
Definitely could be. I can follow up. I've got a couple of names here, Kevin Hurley and Lisa Green, both of whom I've corresponded with in the past, but not at length. And I talked to them at one point, it was probably over a year ago, about, I talked to Leah and we said, we'd love to at some point get you guys here to meet and understand more and get more people involved. And I think it was probably 2020 and then COVID hit or something, but we had talked about wanting to build more of a relationship there. So yeah, I think having a trust and having a group that's like the go-to group for that is going to be helpful.
Are we all set with okay, so we have a request for authorization to declare the old fire rescue vehicles surplus and to authorize disposition in accordance with town policy regarding disposal of surplus property.
Okay, so this policy was adopted in 2019, largely tracks with 30B, but prior to that, there had not been a policy. So this is anything let's see. Let's see. So yeah, we're basically looking for a vote of the board to designate the former fire rescue as surplus, which if the board votes that, the procurement officer would then either advertise or go through the 30B process if it's valued at $10,000 or more.
And this is valued at 10,000, at less than $10,000.
Probably, but we don't know.
So is this email adequate for the written recommendation?
It's up to you. You're the board.
So is that how typically is it communicated?
Well, up until a couple of years ago, there wasn't a policy. So there were things that were like gathering dust because there hadn't been, the former police chief he had all these guns and things. He's like, I can't get rid of them. There's no policy. So we put a policy in place. So we haven't, in the time I've been here, we definitely traded things on vehicle purchases. So I think
when Mike Ruccino was here, he loved doing that. So he would, try and get every cruisers and stuff. We did a lot of it when Mike Ruccino was.
okay. With
No,
the
a lot of
municipal,
actually selling.
the municipal, is that the?
On eBay.
Oh, really? Okay, because we do participate in municipal. which is a good clearinghouse for, cities and towns. And so, it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Is it
Well, I
worth
think-
just generating a simple form that people use, like if they want to?
Yeah, we could do that.
Jim, have you seen anything like that? Or
I
people
haven't.
just use-
Usually.
Wendy, it doesn't happen very much at all.
Yeah.
It's really rare.
Yeah. So I mean, I think all we need is a motion and to vote and,
Yeah, I mean, I just got this last week, and I was just trying to get it done and move
Right,
forward.
right,
And,
so I mean, that's all we need to do, right? We need to just make a motion and vote on it.
just to declare it surplus.
Right,
Yeah,
declare it surplus.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's all.
yeah. The actual disposition process is kind of the staff responsibility.
Yeah, so I move that we declare the old fire rescue vehicle surplus and authorize disposition in accordance with town policy. We're just for the old surplus property.
Second.
Any further discussion?
So what happens to the funds?
We go to the general funds.
We go into miscellaneous non-recurring.
I'm just smiling because lately that's a popular.
Catch all.
And then how do funds from there get spent?
So they close out to at the end of the year and then they essentially go to free cash to be reappropriated.
So in that tax recap model that I sent out last week, when you look at the revenue sheet, one of the lines is miscellaneous non-recurring. We typically project 0 because it's non-recurring. You can't count on it, as opposed to lease revenue or that kind of thing. But in any given year, we typically get 30 or 40,000, but we don't project that we're going to get any. So it's all kind of found money.
So this just means that for surplus, or that free cash number of 1.7 plus or minus is gonna go up by $9,999. And we'll debate what to do with it next.
Affordable housing.
Correct. That would be bad. Yeah. Did, we had a motion and second?
Yep. We have discussion.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
It's $9,000.
You're saying that, yeah.
Could be a tiny house.
Yeah.
You can stand up inside. You can stay, yeah, that's right. You can stand up inside. Okay. Placing items for further agendas. Do we have anything?
I have a thought on the future agenda,
Yeah.
other than some of what we've already talked about. And I don't want to spring this on you, but it's an important topic. So it's on the issue of the bylaw that we have for the short-term rental bylaw.
Okay.
Because as you, I think, know, we had one filed, it ultimately was withdrawn, and it may or may not come back. And I didn't think that while that was pending was the right time to be re-looking at the policy, but now that nothing is pending, it might be.
This
Because
would be the right time.
that's what I'm suggesting, because I did have, a couple of conversations with different, people, including the applicant, and I acknowledged that it is really unclear. And there's not a lot of precedent because the board's only handled one of those applications since the bylaw was adopted in fall of 2017. And the bylaw does authorize the board to adopt regulations. It has never done that. So there's no guidance on, there's some guidance in the bylaw, but there's not a whole lot. So, I think it would be kind of helpful at a staff level to have some direction from the board on what is your posture toward these short-term rentals, because we're going to see more, with the Airbnb and the Verbo and these kinds of things, and it's a kind of a gray area. The state law has
Part of
changed.
it was at the time that we wanted to do something and we kept getting it. Well, the state's going to have an overarching policy, so we'll wait till the state does it, and they kick the can. So
Well, but now they have, they did, but I'm not Yeah, I know Mike had looked into that. Mike McCarron had looked into that and written some memos on it. But it's basically, it's just like a gray area that, you know, I've had a number of conversations with the town planner, with the building inspector, and, you know, I think with the application that had come in, I think we were handling it properly. And it was, you know, but it wasn't, I mean, just here's an example. It provides for an annual license. And so, you know, the question was raised of if, let's say the license was issued, you know, and a year passes, could it then be revoked? And I said, yes, it could. It doesn't say anywhere in the bylaw, it doesn't give any criteria. It's not an entitlement, it's an allowance. And unlike, you know, we have used car licenses or liquor licenses where it's pretty routine. This isn't routine. There hasn't been others of these. So I said, I certainly can't tell you what board is going to be seated in December of 2022 or 23. I can't tell you that they couldn't potentially revoke it. And so they're like, why would we make this investment if it might be? And I don't know what to tell you. I can't go beyond what the bylaw says. So having some sense of like, what is the board's policy on this, I think could be helpful.
Yeah.
There's so many issues, like.
There's a lot of, yeah.
Does the fire department inspect? Because the building inspector inspect. It's like, you know, is it a board of health?
Yeah.
Because are you making breakfast? Oh, it's like, it's unbelievable how many little things you gotta deal with.
Right.
Was it?
We dealt with all of, you know, we put a lot of time into that this summer and it didn't end up ever coming forward, but, you know, there were a number of staff meetings and review with legal counsel and, you know, interdepartment meetings.
Think about.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is you put all that together and I'm sure the town spent $3,000 or $4,000 or some significant number in reviewing something that in the end never came about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think if you looked at the staff time and hours, maybe not the legal, I mean, that was, but no, yeah, it was a significant, you know, and it didn't, and it doesn't, you know, here's another example. The bylaw doesn't require a public hearing. So we had been contacted by a direct abutter. And so as a courtesy, we said, we'll let you know. And we did let them know, but there's no requirement for a public hearing or a butter notification. Should there be, you know, there's all kinds of questions that the bylaw is very, you know.
We never thought of that.
Yeah.
The public hearing, but.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is such a big item right now, there's gotta be drafters.
There are.
Bylaws.
Yeah, definitely there are. Yeah.
So would this be a planning board effort or a select board effort?
Well, the way it's written right now, the select board is the licensing authority. I think the planning, they don't really see it as their issue. And under the current bylaw, I think they're right.
Yeah, really.
But it does get messy, like Archie was saying, because of, you know, some of the nuance on the definition of bed and breakfast versus lodging house versus, you know, short-term rental. It's not always crystal clear, you know, whether something, you know, in fact, I mean, with this one application, the building inspector said, you know, if I read that to be a bed and breakfast, that's an allowed use as a matter of right in the zoning. Why does that also need a license? It's like, I don't know. I mean, it's muddy. So I hesitate to bring it up, but it's just, it came to mind that it's something that's hanging out there that's not really clear. And
how many, even before you got here, I guess we spent so many hours of whatever, Marino Drive and Shiro. Unbelievable. And I don't think it was ultimately ever really resolved.
I don't disagree with that.
I go down, take pictures of it, so I got lots.
So I'm going to add that to my list of projects. Somehow I managed to forget that one. I've been racking my brain of like, what are the things
we forget about.
Short-term rental bylaw. You know, it's the kind of thing that if we wait till it's a present issue, it's almost like, I don't know.
It's too late at that point, really.
For that
Yeah.
specific, yeah.
No, so this is.
Well, that's what we were dealing with an existing issue. And so it made it seem like in the past that we were targeting, we were making the rule up just to, yeah.
Yeah, a lot cleaner if we could get something. There isn't, when we're not confronted by something.
So I do think, I don't have a lot written in for open session for the November 1st. I do think this, postponement of what was item B tonight is there's gonna be a lot to talk about in there. And Rick was correct. And, it's something you guys ought to get the presentation ahead of time. So this, this extension of 2 weeks gives me time to put that all together. And I think even if that agenda ends up being fairly light in terms of number of items, there's going to be 100 different things that you can choose to talk about. So, and we do have a number of executive session items for the first.
Hopefully an hour and a half is enough for executive session.
We'll review, if you feel we need more time as it gets closer, as long as the board can start early, that's always an option.
Is it an option to push back the start time of the open session? Sounds good.
Suppose we could, but seems to me it's so sort of firmly entrenched. I don't know if that'd be a good idea. Because it is a, open public meeting. I think there's a lot of value in consistency for that kind of scheduling, something like that.
Yeah. I just meant if there's a particular meeting that the executive session is longer. 5 o'clock is a little challenging.
Yeah, okay, all right.
I mean, I can do it.
Yeah, okay, well, and I'll keep that in mind. Hopefully we won't need to do that anyway. I was just kind of speculating, thinking about what we already know about, so. But,
I mean, as it is right now, what I have on the list, I think it's totally doable in 90 minutes. But if there's, if there are new things that come in the next 2 weeks or that I don't have on my list, it could change.
So what about for next week? Do we need to prepare for that at all, or are we just presenting the letter that we got from the?
So, I know. So we're going to take that letter and take some of the other suggestions and put that all together, including you'd forwarded one just a couple of days ago, which was very good suggestion or good to think about. So, we'll get something out onto the web tomorrow to promote that. And, we'll put into the packet everything that we think is relevant background, even if we think you've already gotten it, just so you have it kind of all in one place. And then we will have just, I think, a brief executive session ahead of time for the one issue. So I'll work with Rick on what the start time is, but whether that's 6 or 6:15.
I don't think we don't need to start at 5:30.
No. It's just the one topic. So. But I have told people, I've been in touch with some of the neighbors over at Drake's Landing. They're very interested in that meeting next Monday, and I've confirmed, yes, it's on the town calendar. We just haven't done much beyond that to promote it yet, unfortunately. But I've kept them briefed, and I told them that I think one way or the other, whatever the direction the board sets is probably going to end with a town meeting vote in the spring, one way or the other.
Yeah.
So I've kind of set that expectation. I think I don't see any,
Yeah.
there's a few scenarios where that can happen, but one way or the other, it's going to get to town meeting.
Wonder what the, thinking of trying ways to reach out to more people, get more people aware of, say, a meeting like that, about soldiers and sailors. Are there, say for, the 2 local Facebook pages, which I don't spend a lot of time looking at, but, West Newbury People and West Newbury Days. if they could or would, if it's against their policy to not to post it. They should be able to.
No, they always do, yeah. We always tag them in our posts.
Yeah, okay.
And with West Newbury people, the town account is actually a member of West Newbury, so we can post directly to that. Page.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and anytime we post something, we tag them both, so they get a notice that they were tagged.
Okay,
And more often than not, they then repost on their own
Okay.
page.
okay, because that would, that might be a good venue. I mean, this would be a good discussion to have, as much participation as possible.
We'll get something good out tomorrow, with town meeting and some of the other stuff in the last couple of weeks. It's been kind of all consuming.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think it would take that long to write up something nice, but it'll take an hour.
Okay, that's what I meant to say when Casey said that. Announcements, we should announce at the town meeting that in 2 days, we're gonna talk about the thing.
Good point.
Good point.
I meant to, I knew there was something, I just couldn't remember, because I had thought about that earlier. That's a perfect place to,
I think we
Tell
actually
people.
said that originally too, because we're like, oh, we're roughly 2 days after town meeting.
Yeah, right.
And that's what they said.
because people at town meeting are more likely to be people that are concerned, yeah.
Okay, well, does anybody else have anything to add? We adjourn at 9:16. 9:15. All in favor? Aye.